Good afternoon, and welcome to today's discussion. I am Jonathan Bagger, Chief Executive Officer of the American Physical Society. The mission of the American Physical Society is to advance and diffuse the knowledge of physics. And to me, that means to everyone, irrespective of their race, gender, sexual orientation, economic status, and national origin. And that is why I am so happy to be with you here today. Last summer, the tragic deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others graphically demonstrated what so many people of color already knew, that structural racism afflicts all aspects of our society in the United States and around the world. In response, the American Physical Society, under the leadership of 2021 APS President Dr. Jim Gates, launched a series of webinars to illuminate, educate, and begin the difficult discussions necessary to make much needed progress. Today's webinar is the fourth in that series. This afternoon, on behalf of the American Physical Society, I am delighted to welcome Dr. Freeman Hrabowski, President of the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and Dr. Willie May, Vice President for Research and Economic Development at Morgan State University in Baltimore. Drs. Hrabowski and May are visionary leaders and Maryland icons who are transforming their institution into national models for inclusive STEM education. I am very grateful that they have accepted our invitation to join us here today. And with that, I pass the floor to Jim, who will serve as moderator of our discussion. Jim, over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Again, welcome to all of our participants to this fourth in the series of the Delta Phi webinars. As those of you who have been following along with us will recall, we started with the first webinar last summer, talking about removing barriers, because in fact, discrimination is a kind of barrier that exists. And those of us who do physics are well aware that physics is something that has added value when you increase the number of people who participate. Our second webinar was opening up the avenue for the larger community to come to understand something about HBCUs, historically Black universities and colleges, as well as minority-serving institutions. And our third in this series concentrated on the Team Up report, which is out there stirring the waters, trying to create space for progress to be made. And so here we come to our fourth webinar, and the first in the year of 2021. I'm very grateful to our two panelists today, because we're departing from our previous formats, which have all been panels. Instead, today, we have two distinguished educators and researchers and scientists who will talk about what it takes to move the needle. Now, what do we mean by move the needle? Well, in our field of physics, the participation of African Americans in the field is desperately low. And if you compare us to other sciences, like say biology, if you went back, say 20 or 30 years, they weren't so different from we are. But in the biological science, there has been a sea change. And one of the architects of that sea change is Professor Freeman Hrabowski. Freeman was born in 1950, the same year that I was, so it must have been a good year. And he, in 1992, became the president of the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, one of the 12 public universities composing the University of Maryland system. His tenure has seen an utter transformation of that campus. And for 6 consecutive years, it was voted #1 in the up-and-coming universities by US News and World Report. But the thing that Freeman has really been a transformative leader is about creating something called the Meyerhoff program. And that's what we want to focus on today. The Meyerhoff program, well, the best recommendations I know is to talk about 2 of its alums that you may have bumped into. One of them was Dr. Jerome Adams, who just recently completed a term of office as the Surgeon General of the United States. Or maybe you've heard about Miss Kizmikia Corbett. Dr. Fauci has referred to her in recent times as the lead NIH in COVID vaccine research. These young people are both alums of the program that Freeman established. Our other distinguished guest is someone that you may not know about, but I've known Dr. Willie May for some number of years. He was the director of the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, NIST, and the Undersecretary of Commerce for Standards and Technology. He's been involved in numbers of international organizations, collaborations in other countries such as Brazil, China, and the European Union. He's worked on problems related to global warming and food security, and he's developed protocols for collection of environmental samples looking at trace organic analysis and including techniques in liquid chromatography. He was also a neighbor. In fact, this is an all Birmingham panel, folks. Both of these gentlemen were born in the same panel. And with that, I'm going to get out of the way, and Willie's going to be basically the interviewer. And we've asked Freeman to tell you what he's done and what his program has done in the biological sciences, with the hope that we physicists will be able to catch some of this lightning in a bottle and bring this kind of change to our field. Dr. May, I'm turning the camera over to you.
Well, good afternoon, Professor Gates, Jim, and to everyone in our viewing and listening audience. This is truly an honor for me to participate in this event this afternoon and to have this fireside chat with my longtime friend and fellow Birminghamian, the one and only Freeman A. Hrabowski. Dr. Hrabowski, Freeman, I have heard you on a number of occasions describe the encounter that you had with the infamous Eugene Bull Connor before you were taken off to jail while participating in the 1963 Children's March for Civil Rights. Can you please share with us some of the details of that encounter and how that particular experience helped to shape your life?
Thanks, and it's great to be with you, Willie, and with Jim. Let me start by saying that at UMBC, our campus is in Baltimore, but I grew up, like Willie, in Birmingham. And whenever I talk about the experience with the police commissioner, I have to first say that all started because I had the privilege of hearing a great orator in my church in the middle of the week who said, if the children participate in this peaceful protest, all of America will understand that even our kids know the difference between right and wrong. And what he said that was profound to me was, and our children will be able to go to better schools. We had always heard about second-class status of our schools. In many cases, we had books that were hand-me-downs from white schools. And I looked up and said, who is that guy again? And of course, his name was Dr. Martin King. I was 12. I was in the back of the class doing my math. My parents were placating me with food on the one hand, M&Ms, the good time with the peanuts, and mathematics. And I'm solving the math problem, and I hear this, and I've always connected this work in civil rights and problem solving to math as a mathematician. But it was that experience that led to my going to march, and all the children who marched were placed in jail in the midst of fire hoses. And I was leading my little group at 12, and he asked me what I wanted, and I said, all we wanted to do was to kneel and pray for our freedom to go to better schools. He actually spat on me and threw me into the police wagon, and we went to jail, and I spent a week in jail, 5 days, horrible days in jail. But what the experience taught us, as Dr. King and our parents were outside the jailhouse, and Dr. King said, what you do this day will have an impact on children not yet born. What we came to know was that we could be empowered to have some say in our destiny, and that tomorrow could be better than today. That was the lesson from that experience for me as one of those kids in that children's crusade in Birmingham, literally 50 plus years ago.
So Freeman, I'm going to mention this to you now, and we've talked a lot and we've never mentioned this. There's a very good chance that my father, Willie May, who was a partner with Davis King in the Finlay Avenue Bonding Company, may have very likely been the guy who bailed you out.
We had not talked about that.
In the late 1980s, actually a few years before you became president of UMBC, you created the Meyerhoff Scholars Program that has been mentioned earlier, which Science Magazine has called a vaunted program for boosting the diversity of U.S. academic scientists. And I would say the one that everyone acknowledges as having significantly increased the number of African Americans and underrepresented minorities in STEM. Sure. So tell us about that program and how it has evolved and matured over the years. And secondly, tell us, what's your secret sauce, man? That makes this program so successful in its mission.
Sure.
Others have tried to replicate your program, but in fact, no one else has been nearly as successful.
And yet, in more recent years, the program is being replicated successfully at Chapel Hill and Penn State by Howard Hughes funding, and now at Berkeley and San Diego with funding from Chan Zuckerberg. So, but let me say that to think about secret sauce or the Meyerhoff program, one has to first understand the nature of UMBC, University of Maryland, Baltimore County. We are a young campus, only 50-some years old, yet people would be surprised to know that we're in the top 20 in research funding from NASA. As an example, Balad Demos, who's one of my Black physicists, we have two, it's heads of the Joint Center for Earth Systems Technology. So it is a research campus that takes a lot of time to think about how we educate undergrads, not just grad students. And it was in the late 80s that I was very concerned, and my colleagues and I were very concerned, because most of the Black students there were not doing well. Remember now, we were the only campus in the state of Maryland founded at such a time that kids of all races could come there. Every other campus has been founded either for Blacks or for whites. So you have the wonderful HBCUs, like my alma mater, Hampton, like Morgan. And then for us, though, we like saying we are historically diverse. From the beginning, in the South, that was very unusual that you could have Black kids there. It has always been predominantly white. Right now, it's about mixed. It's about half white and half. The largest minority group is Asian, and then Black and Latinx and a few Native Americans. But I tell you all of that to say that in the 80s, kids of color were not doing well. Black students, other kids of color were not doing well, particularly in science. And we were trying to figure out what we could do. I looked around the country to find one campus, not one of the HBCUs, that have a history of helping Blacks go on to get degrees in science, but a predominantly white campus that had a history of doing that. I could not find one in the country that could tell me even 10 students who were graduating with a bachelor's were going on to get a PhD somewhere. We went around the country looking for that. And even today, those numbers are still very small. We have become the leading producer of Blacks who go on to get MD PhDs. I gave a talk at Harvard this past week. Harvard is actually number 2. They produced 17 who've gotten MD PhD since 2000. Morehouse and Xavier have produced about 12. We have produced 42 in that group. So we produced 2.5 times as many. And we are second only to Howard in producing Blacks who get STEM PhDs in general. Now, most of ours and most of all the STEM PhDs produced are, as you know, more in the life sciences than in the physical sciences. It's one of the issues. But the key to the program has been researchers, faculty members. And my faculty colleagues are, for the most part, not of color. We're just getting 1 or 2 in a department, if that. We're like other research universities, predominantly white, where most are not Black or Latinx. And yet people like Mike Summers and others in biochemistry have shown the way in helping us to get more faculty to get involved. And so my TED Talk is on 4 pillars of college success. And I learned something from chairing the National Academies Committee on underrepresentation. And that was this, that it's not just that Blacks and Latinx students, Latino students, don't succeed in science. The vast majority of whites who begin in science and engineering in our country do not succeed. In fact, 2/3, when you look at for whites, only about 32% of those who begin with a major in science and engineering will graduate with a major in science and engineering. For Asians, it's about 41%. For Blacks and Latinos, it's only about 20%. Now, the first response from the committee at the National Academies was, it's a K-12 problem. I often say colleges blame high schools, who blame elementary schools, and the elementary schools blame the family, and the husband says it's the wife's problem. It's the wife's side of the family. That's the problem. We all blame someone else. But when we looked at the data, what we found was that even the highest achieving students in our country, those who have the 4s and 5s on the AP exams, those who've taken AB and BC calculus and some AP, even among that group, large numbers do not succeed. And quite frankly, often the more prestigious the university socially and academically, and the higher achieving that student, the greater the likelihood that student will leave science within the first year or two. Why? Because they end up not getting that A in that course, or B even, and many get C's. And in contrast, in the humanities, in the social sciences, if they read and think and work hard, read and think well and work hard, they'll get an A. And we know that those disciplines tend to be a little more nurturing to students. We in math and science and engineering are focused on the problem, less on the student often. And so the students leave. So 2/3 of Americans who begin. And so my TED Talk focuses on the 4 pillars of college success, which are at the heart of the Meyerhoff program, to your question. It is the idea of high expectations, of building community among the students, that it takes researchers to produce researchers, and then there must be rigorous evaluation of the work, qualitative and quantitative evaluation. And the stunning part about the outcomes is it's not about, about the expectations, is that it's not just about expectations of students. The question we rarely ask is, what should be expected of us as the professoriate? If most students are not succeeding in a class, what else might we do to give support so that more can make it? And of the university, if we admit students in certain majors, what responsibility should we have for ensuring that they have a very reasonable chance of succeeding in the discipline, whether it's physics or biochemistry? And so Meyerhoff is about those principles and about 13 very structured elements, approaches that we take. And when we replicate the program, again, from Penn State and Chapel Hill, there's a science piece you can read that we've written on it, all the way to what we're doing right now out in California. You will see that faculty are working with faculty to put in place all of these elements, starting with the bridge program in the summer before this experience begins, all the way through very substantive research beginning after the freshman year, and that building of community where students support each other throughout the work. It's all of that that has made the difference. Dr. Kizmikia Corbett is a great example. She's the first Black woman in the world to be a lead scientist on a team. The NIH team was led by her and Bonnie Graham in inventing and discovering a vaccine. First time in the history of the world. Interestingly enough, the young man, Jerome Adams, who was the Surgeon General until recently, was in biochemistry with us, did research, went on to med school in Indiana, got a grad degree from Berkeley, and became Indiana commissioner, and then finally general surgeon. But the one other example I would use to make the point, the first time a Black has ever won the Young Investigator Award of the Neuroscience Society for the world, Black, in 2019 was Kafri Zarasa Meyerhoff, who is now with an endowed chair at Duke. We have 4 Black males who are with endowed chair, one with the endowed chair, the others on the faculty, tenured or moving towards tenure. And in the technical areas, by the way, first Black woman to get a PhD in computer science from Michigan, who's on the faculty at Florida now. I can name you first of Black men and women out of our program who've gone on and completed these PhDs. So the program does well because we have brought science to the work. One of the challenges we face when thinking about inclusion diversity is we never bring the rigor of thinking into it to make sure that we are looking at what does it take background wise and support to help students succeed.
You know, you wouldn't say it, but I will. Part of that secret sauce might be called Freeman Hrabowski. Let's move to the next question. And actually, you and Jim have stolen part of that question. I was going to ask that as a result of at least mention that as a result of the world situation with COVID-19, the entire world has heard of some of your, 2 of your very prominent alums of the Meyerhoff program, that is Kizmikia Corbett and Jerome Adams, the immediate past Surgeon General. But I know this, and I know this is a tough question. I mean it to be tough. You don't ask a parent who their favorite children are. Having said that, can you share with us the names and fields of study of a few of the other Meyerhoff alums that we really should know about?
Sure. I will start. The one point I did make about, first of all, about the importance of faculty, I really say this when people give me credit for the program. I had always said, if you have any leader of any race who shows commitment to these goals, we can have it. And so the presidents of Chapel Hill and Penn State are definitely not of color. They have been committed. Same thing out in California. But when looking at people, I mentioned Kafri Zarasa in particular because of the Neuroscience Award, but he has invented a pacemaker for the brain to address mental disorders, bipolar disease, and schizophrenia. And is also working with the research community to think about what we can do to produce more people in his field and others like his. The young man who wrote the New York Times bestseller, Black Man in White Coat, Damon Tweedy, is another one of the professors there at Duke right now, who has interesting background and did research as an MD and then with law school at Yale, an MD, JD. Our key, though, is to produce as many MD PhDs as possible. And what I would tell you is that the head of radiation oncology, a residency program at MD Anderson, a young woman from UMBC, University of Pennsylvania, MD PhD, and is now over that program and the only Black woman there in radiation oncology, tenured faculty member. And I mentioned the woman at Michigan, who's now down in University of Florida, McMullen, who is with a center there in human-centered computing, for example, and several others. And then young man who finished, Nadoki, who finished Purdue, first Black man to finish a PhD in computer science there, now working in a company in Silicon Valley. So in computer science, in biochemistry, in a number of those areas, a number of students who went to Harvard and got PhDs in biophysics or biochemistry. One young woman, Jasmine, who is now at Columbia in epidemiology, postdoc from Penn. And then another brilliant young man, Avery Posey, who was on the faculty at Penn in biochemistry, got his PhD from Chicago, postdoc at Penn, now tenure track faculty there. And I could go on. And then there have been those in physics. The numbers have been much smaller because we've not focused on physics, because money talks, you know that. So NIH and the life sciences have driven things, and areas with engineering. One of the challenges is to have focused initiatives in those areas. We've done more in mathematics because the National Security Agency has given me funding for that. So we produced a number of Blacks. At one point, 1/4 of all the Black PhDs at NSA were my graduates, were Meyerhoffs. And of course, now, as a mathematician, I have to tell the truth. At that time, there were only 8 at NSA and 2 were my graduates. So you have to have the base before you talk percents, as you know.
And my guess is that you know all of your Meyerhoffs by name. You know, it truly amazed me the few times I've walked across your campus with you, and you just walk up and seem randomly, here's a student, you call them by name, you know where they're from, you know their mother's name, their father's name, you know what they're majoring in, and you ask them how they're doing in their grades.
Sure. And you know, part of
amazing, man.
Well, one of the parts, though, I've been talking about some of my Black graduates, but it's important to say this is in a setting where we're producing scientists of all races. The head of the applied physics lab at Hopkins has this PhD, all 3 degrees in computer science from UMBC. The president.
I didn't mean to imply the people you were talking to are all Black. They were just students.
That's right. But I want the audience to know I'm very proud of those Black students, but also of my white students. One name in the COVID crisis that I want people to know, one of my white students, who's a young middle-class woman from Frederick, Maryland, undergrad from UMBC, PhD from Hopkins, postdoc from MIT, Caitlin Sattler, S-A-D as in dog, T-L-E-R, is leading the NIH study, national study on asymptomatic patients. And she has a TED Talk on healing one's body, and she's got twice as many hits as mine, and she's 1/2 my age. Okay. So it's a great story. Caitlin Sattler. I've got 1 million hits. Okay. She's got 2 point something, but look her up. Go right ahead.
Yeah. And Freeman, you sort of alluded to this. If memory serves me correctly, one of the early goals of the program were to get more underrepresented minorities in the professoriate.
Yes.
How has the program fared in that regard?
Sure. I would say we have done better than almost any, and we are doing nothing like as well as we should be doing. What do I mean by that? We assumed that if students are in PhDs and got postdocs, many universities would be really running to get them. That is just not the case. I find companies far more enlightened when it comes to being creative in searching for and bringing in faculty. I mentioned the Hopkins APL, which is different from the university, but the Applied Physics Lab. But my graduate there has brought in at least about 9 Black PhDs who come out of the undergrad Meyerhoff program that he went out, had people looking for while they were in graduate school. And now he has them there in chemistry and in math and other areas as an example. But I would say the ones who've gone to places, and they are now, again, from Duke to Stanford to Hopkins, are doing well, but most are not going into the professoriate. We are now focusing more attention on talking about going into the professoriate. What will that require beyond the postdoc experience? And one of the challenges is that I'm always finding young people with these degrees and they can't find jobs. And yet on the other hand, we have universities always saying we can't find them. So there is this need for this clearinghouse that not only will identify people, but will give them the coaching, the mentoring, and the being a champion for them to make a difference. And that's what we're doing now, working to connect some of our graduates who are in grad school to the right champions who can help them move on to get into the professoriate. Because most physics departments, we have one other physics professor who's Black, who is Anthony Johnson, former fellow, Bell Fellow, wonderful, wonderful. But those are the only two we have. And we need opportunities for faculty, including the Black physicists, to have programs where they can train more people to go into the professoriate.
And you probably have mentioned this. In fact, both Jim and you sort of hit on this earlier. And my question is, comment is that within the STEM disciplines, we've really seen a notable increase in the number of chemists, biologists, engineers, mathematicians. But we are lagging behind in creating new Black or minority physicists.
Absolutely.
In fact, we shared experiences on a program that NIST and College Park ran, trying to begin to solve this problem.
Yeah.
Is the Meyerhoff program doing anything specifically to address this concern?
Not really. We are doing more in mathematics because of the National Security Agency and producing more, but we need funds. We need funds. It's just that simple. It really is. And even when we talk about biology, chemistry, the life sciences, I know the data because I was privileged to chair not only the National Academy's Committee on Underrepresentation, but I also chaired the Obama Commission on Underrepresentation broadly for African Americans in science. And I can tell you that there's not one national agency in America that can tell me that even 2% of the scientists in that agency are Black. Not even 2% Black. Not even the Health Disparities Institute at NIH. So while there has been an increase in the pool, and we have some people getting jobs, for the most part, we haven't made the kind of dent we need to make in the health sciences, but in the computational areas or in the physics areas. And the few physics PhDs we produce, those who've gone on and gotten PhDs from MIT to Stanford to other places, are now, with few examples, are working in industry as data scientists or at a research lab somewhere, which is good, very good. But we have not had people moving them into the professoriate. So we need a special initiative in physics. First, because, and I can say this as somebody who loves math and who actually had a physics minor, is that people just don't know what physicists do. We've said that before. Jim and others are working to change that, I know, but we need more ambassadors who are not even physicists who can help us to pull people into that work. When I say to people that it's like, it's considered almost heresy when I say those who are in physics and math they're here, the engineers are here. And people look at me like, what? Everybody thinks the engineer is the biggest thing you can be. And I'm saying, no, the foundation, everything comes out of math and physics. But that is not what people have been taught. And so we have that need. And I know the American Physics Society is working on that, but we really do need programs structured programs with the goal of producing PhDs in physics, with a number going to the professoriate and others going to other programs. We know they can get great jobs, but we'd like some to be going into the professoriate.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has recently introduced some legislation that would enable and provide significant resources to our universities for partnering with industry to prepare our students for the careers in the top technology areas that are anticipated to underpin careers in the future.
Yeah.
Whichever country wins the race in these key technology areas, such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, quantum computing, quantum science in general, advanced communications, advanced manufacturing, systems, synthetic, and engineering biology, will actually be the superpowers in the future. If this legislation is passed, it will no doubt drive a pulse of funding into our universities at a rate that we haven't seen since the 1960s, when we were in the space race against the Russians. What should we do as a country to make sure that an appropriate amount of this funding reaches the African American and Latino communities who are now essential to this country being able to compete with the Chinese and other up and coming powers in these areas? And certainly the folks of color, we are important now, because unlike the last 6 years when people from around the world were coming to be trained in our best-in-class university system, and many of them were staying here in this country and contributing to our society. Well, now they're going home. Now they're going home. And like I said, if we have any chance of competing internationally, we have to invest in the African-American and Latino communities.
And so I agree wholeheartedly. And let me say something that may sound surprising at first, but you'll get my point. I'm very proud of the fact that this country has always brought best thinkers from around the world. It's one of the reasons we are as strong as we are. I am hoping we continue to bring the best from around the world to help humankind and to help our country. And at the same time, that we invest in people in this country. It is interesting that people will be surprised to know my public research campus at the BWI Airport right outside of Baltimore, that when I ask new students how many have a parent from another country, about 60% of my new students have at least one parent from another country. Why? Many are in the military, from military families, the intelligence community, and then people who come into grad school, and a lot are in that Baltimore-Washington corridor, as you know, quite frankly, and work in national agencies, and their kids are here. And so they are with one parent. Now, what am I saying? And we learn a lot from those kids. So I start from the perspective that we want to build brain power. And a lot of that brain power is in populations we have not really given the support to. And that includes kids of color from this country, poor white kids also. How do we build that? You know, I was fortunate to be in an NSF program in the 60s at Tuskegee in a mathematics program. And it really did, besides the fact that my principal was a mathematician, this really took me to the next level in terms of thinking, I want to do math, right? And so having those programs with universities that connect different parts of our society, from companies and national agencies to K through 12 and universities, can be very helpful. But I would say this, but we should not be starting from scratch. There are universities that know well how to do some of these things. There are some of the HBCUs, some that really know some good stuff that can be used. Yours, Howard, Hampton, some others, West Bama, a few others. I mean, A&T, who have been some things. We can build on that. There are some of us that are predominantly white that have made a difference. If people look at the articles that my colleagues and I have written in the last couple of years under issues in science and technology, one of the points we make is that if you take for Blacks or for Latinos, and you take the top 25 institutions in producing students who get bachelors and who go on to different places to get PhDs, And if we just double the numbers coming out of that top 25, we would increase the number of total numbers of Blacks or Hispanics by something like 50% easily, because that first group produces the largest number. Most universities produce 1 or 2 at most a year who may be going on to get a PhD. And I'm saying, if we look at those institutions, for example, my grad alma mater, Illinois, has done a good job in life sciences. The University of Florida is in that top 10 for life sciences, and UMBC. We're the top 3 among 10. The others are all HBCUs, by the way. Let me say that. So we need to be looking at the institutions, regardless of type, who have had some success and building on that success, and then partnering between institutions with the success with minorities, with those who have larger amounts of resources, so we can build that with funding. But I would say it should be about students producing the students, but it must be about diversifying the professoriate. The professoriate is still somewhere between 75 and 80% white. And in most physics departments, I mean, we are very unusual to have, I say 1.5 because one of them is between electrical engineering halftime and halftime in physics, but we do have 1.5 in physics. But most places don't have, predominantly white major research universities, rarely have people of color in the department. It's going to take time to get there, but a part of the programmatic initiative should focus on diversifying the professoriate so they can help in the diversifying of the workforce.
Growing up there in Birmingham, I think you know that we had excellent teachers, and that was due primarily to the fact that segregated society, and they really didn't have very, very many options. I mean, you know, the professional class were the preachers, teachers, undertakers, and undertakers probably made more money than anyone, lawyers, doctors.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned your principal, Mr. Bell.
Yes.
How did him being a mathematician influence you to pursue that career?
Sure.
I know your mother taught you math. I know that, right. And she drilled you that. But how much did Mr. Bell influence that?
Having a Black principal who was a math, my parents both loved math, so yeah. We were doing word problems all the time, and they sent me to Massachusetts in high school in the summer to see what it would be like to be in class with white kids. And I will say, I was in Springfield, Massachusetts, taking math and chemistry at a place called Technical High School. And I will tell you that when I came back to my high school the next year, I was so enriched by that experience. These were kids who were looking at going off to major places, and there was more intensity in the work. There's no doubt about that. Start there. But what was interesting was what inspired me more than anything else in my education in high school was that principal who did something very unusual. He would come into each of the little gifted and talented classes, and he would put a problem on the board. And in my 9th grade year, if anybody could solve it, they could see him in the hall. And if you could solve it, he would give you a nickel. By the time I was in the 11th grade, you got a dime if you could solve that problem. And I was determined, I was younger than my classmates. I was determined to solve that problem every day. But the idea that he would give us problems that we couldn't initially solve, and we had to think about it and fight over it and study it, was a big deal. And for me, it was a big deal because I was such a nerdy kid. If I got that dime, I could get 10 Tootsie Rolls and I could make friends with my Tootsie Rolls.
Well, I remember Ullman sent a number of great math students to Knoxville.
Yes.
Ethelyn Lindsay, Tina Truss, Tommy
Wright.
Wright.
Wright is over statistics at the Bureau, Census Bureau, PhD in mathematics. So they did a fine job under the circumstances. They really did.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you again for coming and participating in my retirement from NIST.
Yes.
But I flunked retirement, as you see. and my guess is that you will too. I'm not going to ask you about when you're going to retire.
Right.
But I will ask you, what type of things might you consider doing next?
Sure. The book that my colleagues and I just finished and that we're using around the country with universities entitled The Empowered University, Shared Leadership, Culture Change, and Academic Success. And the key to it is that we are working with boards and faculty and presidents on looking at how universities can look in the mirror to determine how to help more students, succeed, not just students of color, including students of color, of course, but to focus on the challenges that they face. I'll be doing more and more of that. I work with the program at Harvard right now with new presidents, and I'm coaching a number of new presidents. This is my 30th year coming up as president, so I'm very fortunate. And when I leave this position, I love working behind the scenes, supporting other leaders on these issues and helping people think through how to become broader in their understanding of what it takes for students of color, women and students of color, to excel in science areas. And I'm also enjoying working with other countries on those same things.
I've enjoyed this, my friend.
Thank you, Willie. You inspire me.
Back to you, Jim.
Thank you, President Provowski. Thank you, Dr. Willie May. It was a very interesting discussion, and we're going to have a 10-minute break so everyone can take care of all sorts of matters, perhaps some imposed on us by nature. But at the end of that 10-minute break, we're going to come back and have our customary Q&A. That has been the pattern that we've established with these webinars. And so I wanted to make sure that all the people who are viewing the streaming event, now is the time for you to put your questions into the chat, I'm informed by my colleague, and then we will be relaying them to both Dr. May and Dr. Hrabowski. So it is 3:12 according to NIST, because my computer obviously is hooked to the NIST atomic clocks, and so we'll be back at 3:22. Thank you very much. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed that fast-moving discussion. As you can see, these two guys are real superstars in terms of their ability to handle the media, and we're very grateful that they could take time off from their extraordinarily busy lives to talk a little bit about what this one program, the Meyerhoff program, has done to move the needle. Now, there were a series of questions that people were posting, and we'd like to try to work through as many of those as possible. And so I'm going to start with one that I saw that came from a professor. I think the name was either Tang or Fang. Unfortunately, we've had some problems with our chat stream, so we might have some garbling there. But the question was, well, the bottom line question was, how much of the underparticipation of African Americans in physics is really race related? I thought this was an interesting question, and I'd like to hear your responses. We know, for example, that in the United States, the average African American family has about 1/10 the amount of wealth as the average European American family. And since schools are funded according to the tax base of the wealth of the community in which the schools are in, that means that the average African American child probably came from a school with between, say, 10%, maybe 20% of the investment that's made to a comparable European American child. So would you discuss how you think that factors into this discussion?
Sure. When we talk about underrepresentation in physics, we should talk first about underrepresentation in STEM, and then about underrepresentation among high achieving students in academics in general. What we know first is that the higher the educational level of parents, the higher the income levels will be, and the better the children will do. And as Jim was just saying, we've got this factor of fewer Blacks coming from that highest, when talking about academic performance, but about income level and opportunities. It is significantly a factor. Race is a very important factor for any number of reasons. One, that so many children are not raised in homes where there are books. Children are not learning necessarily to read well. Even among middle-class children where the reading may be better, they've rarely seen a Jim Gates. They don't know, have never seen a Black physicist or a Black chemist like Willie, or a Black mathematician. And so they haven't even aspired to that. We see the people who are in science tend to want to go to be a doctor. That's what they heard about, the ones who do. And this is why we've moved on MD PhDs as an opportunity. But the idea of producing people who are researchers in general is so novel to so many communities of color and people who are not from privilege that you see just that. Most people have never, if you said, show me two physicists, black physicists, researchers, most cannot do it. Now they know about two superstars, one of whom would be Jim Gates, maybe. They've seen him in commercials, but for the most part, people have not seen him. They just know that guy who looks really distinguished. It's that. So the fact is that race is a very important factor. Even when thinking about blacks who come from other countries, here, what we see is, and they do tend to do well in science. Many do, because they are among the best performers in their countries. They are hungry to get here, and they do well. Yes, lots of kids from the islands, from Nigeria, other places, but rarely do you see them in physics because we've not shown the examples. It's like a chicken and an egg. The more people you see like somebody, why is it that there's so many more people in basketball? I mean, you see a lot of basketball players who are black, and you say, oh, I want to be that person. We don't have TV shows. We don't have rap stars who are physicists. And so it is a challenge to get people to know about the possibilities, the beauty of physics, and the way that physics as an education, that discipline can prepare people for all kinds of careers. Much more work to be done.
Thank you.
And I'd say that, we, as Freeman said, there are not a lot of role models. Folks who see Jim on TV thinks he's the guy who does those TurboTax commercials. He's not one of the world's eminent physicists.
Right.
You're probably a mathematician in part because of Mr. Bell.
Yeah.
I'm a chemist because of Frank Cook there at Parker High School, who took me aside. I mean, chemistry, those things are hard. There were other things, all I wanted to do is get out of Birmingham and not work in the steel mills and coal mines. And there were things that I could have done other than going to a scientific discipline to accomplish that. But I did it because I saw someone who looked like me, who instilled in me the interest and the passion for chemistry. And I think we need more and more of that, because we all imitators. We're chameleons, and we need to see something to believe that we can achieve it.
And so whether talking about teachers in K through 12 and more teachers of color, and especially high school physics teachers and people all the way to the professoriate, to those in the community, we need many more examples if we're going to see more people from the African-American race, from Latinos, from Native Americans who go into those positions. But the fundamental point, Jim, race matters. Race matters.
Thank you. In order to try to maximize the number of questions that we're going to get, what I'm going to try to do from now on is have each of you answer a single question.
Okay.
And that way we can roll through more of the questions that are participants. So the next question I'm going to put to Dr. May, and it's a very short question. Are you interested in hiring more astrophysicists?
At Morgan?
Well, the questioner didn't put a geographic limit. So anywhere, take the question anywhere you want to take it.
Well, certainly, if there were folks of color who were astrophysicists, they could write their ticket, and we would be more than happy to engage in their employment, entertain their employment at Morgan State University, like most universities in this country would. So certainly we would be interested.
Thank you. Next question comes from actually one of my mentors, Neil Lane, former science advisor to President Clinton, and longtime mentor of mine in the area of policy. Neil's question is the following. Which efforts by federal agencies, such as the NSF, the NIH, have worked well, and which have not worked so well, and what more needs to be done?
It's a great question, and we all look up to Neil Lane. He's done so much in this area, and are proud of his authenticity. I would say, when we look at the advanced program for women and increasing the number of women faculty in STEM, I see that as a very effective program. I had the privilege of being PI, and that's funded by NSF. That's an excellent program. We recommended in our National Academy study that there be a similar program from NSF for people of color. And I'm still hoping that that will happen. That will help to increase the professoriate. We went from, at UMBC, from only about 12% of the STEM faculty being tenure track or tenured to now being over 30-some% tenure track and tenured. So we're not where we need to be, but we've come a long way. So that's one example from NSF of at the faculty level. At the training level, NIH has done, I think, much more. We have some programs in NSF, but from my perspective, the most effective programs include funding for the undergraduate scholarships. In this country, when thinking about policy, we understand that the graduate fellow needs funding. We don't necessarily agree that undergraduates need funding, but you're not going to get somebody who can complete a major in physics or biochemistry at UMBC or anywhere who's having to work 30 hours on the outside because he doesn't or she doesn't have the money to go to school. We need programs that will connect research, undergraduate research, for example. Of course, we're going to have the grad level, but undergraduate research and the funding so they don't have to do the outside jobs, and money for programmatic initiatives to build community. I would also say NSA, so NIH has done some of that with its programs in its minority effort when thinking about what was called the MARC program, now the RISE program, and with this new BUILD program. Those are efforts that can help with that. I have been very impressed with what NSA has done with us in producing efforts with scholarships for kids of color to go into mathematical sciences, mathematical and computational sciences. So we need, those are examples that have been working. But thank you, Neil Lane, for what you've done for science in this country.
So the next question reads as follows. I'm currently teaching physics at a high school level, and a large barrier to stop Black students from pursuing physics is the math barrier. By the time I see them as juniors, the level ability on average is not at grade level and oftentimes well below grade level. What could be some ideas or interventions to help alleviate this other than modifying curriculum? And Willie, this is a tough one, so I'm throwing it to you.
I was going to kick that to Freeman.
We're doing a lot with that. Let me just say, if you look at our Sherman Scholars Program at UMBC, it is designed to produce very high achieving math teachers for the middle school and high school levels. One of the problems in America in math education is you really don't need a math major until you're teaching at the high school level. And yet many middle schools now teach algebra 1 and 2 in the middle school level. To teach algebra well, you need to have some grounding in calculus. And many people who are teaching they've had courses in the education programs called Math for Elementary School Teachers that's really less difficult than algebra itself. And so we need more math majors who are with some background in the sciences too, but who can teach at the middle school level to teach, but also to help teachers develop their skills. And why am I saying that? Because to get people ready for you in the 11th grade, we have to give them a solid foundation in algebra somewhere between that 6th grade and that 9th grade year. So by the time they are in high school, they've got that solid word problem skill still working well for them. They can do the geometry and go on and be prepared for the physics, because those algebra word problems are connected to both physics and chemistry. But it's the reading skills and the math skills. We need to look at how we're teaching it to make sure we connect the reading to the math. If you give me a child who can read, I can teach her to solve a math problem if she's had the right foundation. So let's go back some and think about reading and math together in preparation for getting to you in the 11th grade.
So,
and Jim, and let me add one sentence to that. Find some very interesting applications that are challenging and fun, and work it backwards, if you will. Something that can really get the interest of the kids, because we got a lot of very, very smart kids out there who don't know how smart they are.
And unfortunately so often don't read well. I cannot overemphasize that. When you think about word problems, whether in physics and chemistry and math and engineering, they start with words. And what I'm saying is that there's some fundamental reading skills that we all need to focus on, including our math and science teachers, as we work together on building the problem-solving potential and capacity of those students.
okay, so that was really Dr. May's question, but he flipped it over to you. So I'm going to double up and still ask you a question, Freeman. I think it's particularly aimed at you. The question is, And so let me give some background. Maybe you'll want to respond by giving this person a way to look at some of the literature that you've established already on this. But the question is, could you give some practical strategies to provide academic support to students, particularly pursuing physics degrees? And I know you've thought about these sorts of things a lot.
Right. So the 2 or 3 things I would say. If you look at any of the articles we've written on the Meyerhoff program, we talk about those strategies and what they are. One of the very practical strategies is building that study group from the beginning. From the beginning, people with whom the students will work. And that's whether it's physics or in chemistry or in any of those, in math, because at the college level, the same challenge they face in engineering and in physics, if they don't have a certain math background, when you take calculus-based physics, you've got to have that math background. But having study groups from the beginning, having a tutorial center that is not seen as a place where people go when they're slow. Too often in universities, kids have not been encouraged to believe everybody needs help at some time. And so often people don't talk about when they're not doing well. They're just saying, I'm doing okay, until they're not doing okay. And so starting from the beginning, helping students understand we all need help. And even if you can do it on your own, you can do much better if you're working with a group, if you all are working with a tutor. And what we've done is to redesign a number of courses in the first couple of years of science so that we have collaboration, use of technology, instant feedback, and most important, honesty about how each student is doing and talking about the work. We have cohorts. The programs that are most effective will have a cohort of students who will work together to give each other support, more important than anything else. And then faculty and staff who really care, to whom they can go when they have help, when they need help.
Thank you. The next question I'm going to direct to you, Dr. May. It's actually from an African-American physicist that formerly was at Hampton University, your alma mater.
Yes.
Freeman, since you spent time there. This physicist says, in the 40 years I've been involved in physics, I've seen a large growth in higher ed programs for Black physics students, but it's only resulted in a high competition for those few Black physics students available. What are some specific things that should be done to increase the pool of Black students entering college interest in physics? And this one, Dr. May, I'm throwing to you because you kind of alluded to this earlier about practicality. So could you expand a bit on that? And expand on the way that builds on your own professional history, because I think that's the most interesting thing.
Well, like I said, I'm new to the education game. I spent my entire career practically at NIST, and where we had 4 Nobel Prize winners in physics, none that looked like us. And that's not surprising because there aren't very many Black physicists. But I think sort of finding a way that we can make it exciting and challenging and relevant. Black folks can do anything that we want to do. That has been shown throughout all fields of endeavor. You know, I'm a sports junkie, and for a long time, we couldn't play quarterback. Look at the NFL now. We couldn't be a point guard in basketball. Look at the NBA now. And it's the same thing in the fields. 50 years ago, no one would have thought that would be a Jim Gates or Freeman Hrabowski. So we have the capability to do anything that we set our minds to. It has to be made relevant to kids, I think. Obviously, having more federal programs to help us will accelerate things, but certainly I think it has to be something that we want to do, and seeing being inspired by people like Freeman and yourself, Jim, is the first step along that path.
So I earlier asked you, Freeman, about the issue about practical steps. Could you follow up with us to make sure that we have some links to some of the literature that you've actually authored, so that our questioner who asked about these practical strategies will have levers to build on to be able to do so?
Right. Go, if you just go to my page, homepage at UMBC, and you'll see all the articles my colleagues and I have written. Or if you put in Meyerhoff Scholars, you will see large numbers of articles on practical strategies. But I will say this, now that even Howard has its program for STEM students modeled after Meyerhoff. It's Bison Scholars Program. Howard we think of as the Mecca among HBCUs. The person running that program is a UMBC graduate. The provost at Howard is a UMBC graduate, and they know it does work. And the president has supported this. But there are some special elements to any program that will work. I've gotten to this point now, I just have to say this, and that involves everything from bridge programs before the freshman year to having the cohort to making sure you know what the goals are. And I'm saying there could be that kind of program at several institutions with the right funding to produce physicists, I mean, and we started Meyerhoff with 10 scholars in 88, 89. You know, we brought in 9 more affiliates, but it was 10, right? We've now produced 1,000. So the point is this, we could have, I mean, when you produce, the numbers are so small that if there was a laser focus on several institutions truly willing to produce physicists, and obviously ours would be one of those places, that the people are there, because what happens is all the kids who do well in physics and math go to engineering. That's where they go right now. That's considered hot. Because they don't know the beauty of physics, how critical physics is, what you can do with it all. And I know American Physics Society has done some things, but we need people beyond the brilliant Jim Gates who are talking that language, because quite frankly, they're in a program to make it happen. And then use those superstars as the beacon as such, but to have others. And I'm suggesting some kind of pilot, when you work with a number of institutions and put in that, pump in that money with the right people, with the right structure, I mean, with rigor in the structure of the program, it could work. I have no doubt we could easily be producing 5 or 10 a year who go on and complete PhDs easily, just with a special initiative.
Thank you.
But just a comment, we're doing that right now in economics. Of all programs, you may not know this, I'm on the Sloan board, and I will tell you that at places like MIT, in many years, there are no Blacks coming out with PhDs in economics. In the 80s, there were 2. And so the Sloan has been wonderful in giving several of us these grants to produce Black economics. So the kid who's there now, the 400 furthest along right now, is one of my students. The Rhodes Scholar we just produced, one of my students in economics, you know, and so because we started that program, we said, hey, this economics area with mathematics, we took some of the math meetings and said, wow, can you combine these two? And it makes all the difference. We could do the same thing in physics.
Freeman, I have to commend you on your telepathic abilities. My next question was going to be, what are areas in which philanthropy could be most helpful in recruitment, retention, and cultivation of Black students, faculty, and staff? And you just gave the example before I could ask the question. So I think you're either a time traveler or you're getting information around the universe in ways that Einstein would not approve of.
Thanks. But that's the example. It is. It can be done. It can be tailored to any area. Believe it or not, we're even using it with STEM entrepreneurship. Think about it. With kids who are coming out of STEM programs who want to start companies. The same principles about making sure they do well in those first 2 years. Any student who does well in the first 2 years of the work, Bs at least, and gets a positive research experience, and somebody to serve as a mentor would be on his way. When Willie was at NIST, he was wonderful. We had dozens of Black kids going from UMBC to NIST to work in the summers and then continuing on after that. You know, so having that kind of partnership between a NIST, for example, and other places with an emphasis on certain majors and then getting certain people to serve as mentors can make all the difference in the world.
Thank you. Dr. May, the next one's coming your. Oh, you want to add to that? But I have another.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that.
Please go.
Also, you know, one of the reasons that many of our kids are going into engineering and not physics is they have a sense for what engineers do, they think. Yeah. Also, there are jobs out there for engineers. For a few years back, there were not a lot of hot jobs for physicists. But with these this emphasis on these new transformative technologies like quantum science, there is going to be a great need for physicists to understand this new domain, and it's going to be cool to be a physicist. So I think it's coming. I think the opportunity is there, and we just need to make sure that we prepare some of our kids to reap the benefit of this new demand for these types of talents.
And I may sound like Du Bois, but I'm going to say it. But you have to help more kids to be high achieving. I'm very proud to say that I think Du Bois always had a point. When he talked about the talented 10 can be millions of people, but it's the idea you're not going to play around and do physics or math. You've got to be serious about it. And so we have to help more children.
It's hard, as you say.
It is hard. It really is. And so we're working with middle school kids in the city, and I'm saying, yeah, it's fun because we get accustomed to working hard at the work. I don't care how smart you are, it's the grit, it's that hard work. And you start them early and get them into the word problems. I get goosebumps doing math. I tell them, are you crazy? But you got to help people doing that along the way. So by the time they get to undergrad school, they are ready and knowing, I want to make at least a B. I want to get an A. They've got that attitude. So we can't fool people into thinking you can come to college and have to take remedial math and think you're going to do physics. Not going to happen in most cases. That's just
but we can also teach our kids that it's cool to do hard stuff.
Oh, that's exactly
It's cool to do hard stuff.
Our word that we use at UMBC is grit. We call it the house of grit. It's really cool to have that grit where you get knocked down, you get back up, and you keep going at it. You keep working at it. It can be done. We've got to show that brain power is, quite frankly, more fascinating than winning the Super Bowl. Now, some would call that heresy.
Well, they're not going to throw a parade for you, but
I don't know what you guys are talking about. I always thought that solving a hard physics problem was better than winning the Super Bowl.
That's exactly.
Well, playing in or winning the Super Bowl, you entertain some folks for about 3 or 4 hours at a time. If you work in one of these technologies, you can truly transform the world.
Yes.
So I wanted to thank you, Dr. May, for demonstrating your wizarding ability too, because you answered the question before I could get it out of my mouth. So let me turn to a different question. So there's someone who starts a message, Dr. Hrabowski, thank you for taking the time to speak to us today. I want all of my students to feel proud and excited about their learning in introductory physics, even if they didn't master every part of the course.
Yeah.
Following up on one of your comments about why students don't stay in the sciences, do you think high grades are a necessary part of ensuring that positive attitude? Is it worth setting aside concerns about grade inflation to make sure our students recognize how much they've achieved? And this goes right back to what you were just saying, so I thought it was appropriate.
No, it's such a great question. In our Chemistry Discovery Center, the faculty wanted to address the issue that so many students were not doing well. And we were trying to decide, what does a C mean compared to a B? And when we used analytics to look at the students in chemistry, in physics, in math, what we saw was that those students who were able to succeed at the next level, generally, 80, 90% needed at least a solid B level in the work. There were some exceptions, but one of the things we ended up doing with Meyerhoff at the beginning, because some of those young Black kids earned C's, we actually convinced them to retake courses. And the next time they did much better. But based on that, we ended up with faculty wanting to redesign the courses. My question is, what can we do to redesign introductory courses to ensure that students can get to that level of at least a B? Because there's two things going on. You're right. When students get C's and they're good students, they're going to tend to leave. They're going to leave it, and they don't feel good about it. It's absolutely right. But number two, the question is, what does that B mean? I do believe, I'm old school enough to know, we want to know if that student earned a B, got a B, it's because they earned it, and there's a certain level of work, a certain number of skills that are required, certain concepts that must be grasped if the student is to get that B, because it means something. And one of the ways that in the life sciences, one of the things we always say is, well, it's this level because we know if you get an A or B, you're going to do really well on the MCAT, because so many kids want to go to med school. And when they say, well, the test shouldn't be that important, I always say, well, you're going to get on the surgical table, and I'm going to look at you and say, well, my grades weren't good, but I want to cut on you. I don't think so. We want to know they know something. So I think the question is an excellent one. I agree with you about I think sometimes we go hyper about the inflation, but we do want to know that B, I would say, really represents a certain level of of mastery of the material, whether from the American Chemical Society, American Physical. We actually had the American Chemical Society come in with our chemistry discovery center because we had so many more students getting B's that some people say that's because you've gotten easier. Turned out when they looked at the standards, no, the standards had actually gotten higher. So what I say when people talk about the grading is, how do we get a chance to do it, to what we say in this book? Look in the mirror and redesign. Look at redesigning courses and the learning experience to help students to do better than they've done. So that the midterm and final will not be the only ways you grade somebody.
Well, I have to tell you, both of you are somehow in sync with a number of our questioners. Either you anticipate questions or you speak in such a way that you get to questions that I see rolling in. I have this one question that just came in, and I think it touches precisely on what you just mentioned, Freeman. It says, and let me first of all say a larger context. We've focused a lot of the discussion on faculty and the role that they have in preparing the next generation. But what about other STEM involved people on staff and what have you, administrators? What should they be doing? And then finally, to make it a little bit more concrete, the last question was how can we work with administrators to allow students to retake critical courses such as E&M for B or better without holding them back from graduating on time, which connects precisely to what you just said, Freeman.
Sure, and it's working. Administrators and staff are very important. Let's start there. Very important. Sometimes students know that staff member better than that faculty member. Let's be honest. Just depends. If the student is working in somebody's lab, they get to know them better. But what I would say is how to be creative. And we've looked at best practices around the country. Again, look at our chemistry discovery center, because we moved away from the retaking of courses with C so much to the chemistry discovery approach, which allows students to work really hard and to focus on topics in such a way that they can get up to that B level, if at all possible. But I do say this, and we did say this to colleagues, but let's experiment. We did use analytics. We did do some retaking of some courses, and we did see the difference that it made. And so we do allow that now much more so. And quite frankly, I'm always saying the more privileged the institution and student, the more opportunities they have to get things done. We in publics can be sometimes a little too bureaucratic with the rules. And when I've worked with institutions that are with more money, sometimes they work hard to help students succeed more. And we need to find ways of having that flexibility. The goal has to be that by the time the student completes the course, first time or second, that they've grasped that material, that they can prove that they understand the concepts. That should be the goal. So looking in the mirror is what we say in our book, looking in the mirror to rethink how we do things, really important.
So I just want to convey a note, I guess, of congratulations to the two of you. Dan sends in the following comment. He says, "We just need to get more middle and high school students to listen to the three of you. This is very inspiring." I agree with 2/3 of that statement. Listening to the two of you is extraordinarily inspiring.
Let me echo what
go right ahead.
Let me echo what Freeman just said. I think sometimes in education, both higher elementary school, high school, we focus too much on the mechanics and the way we've always done it, that you take the test and we're going to base the grade on the test, rather than trying to find ways to document that the students have attained mastery of the subject matter. Everyone does. Some of the most successful people in our society have not done well in school. And certainly it didn't mean that they didn't have the intelligence. Maybe we were not smart enough to evaluate their mastery of the curriculum. So I think we need to think broadly about how we can expose our students to information and assess their mastery of that subject matter.
Yeah, it's so important to say this, that large numbers of students who come to us with very high test scores and grades still don't succeed in the first 2 years of science. That universities really have not necessarily looked using analytics at the data to see why is that the case. It's so easy to say, well, they're not working hard enough. No, when you've gotten 4s and 5s on AP exams, you work hard, you really do. Another practice, most institutions will say, well, if you've got A, B, and B, C, calculus, start with Cal 3, start with this. And while the student might be able to do well in that discipline, sometimes it takes so much time, they don't do as well in the others. So we are very old schooled about that. Many of our top kids will have 5s on the AP exams. We still strongly suggest, with few exceptions, that they start with the Cal 1 and the physics and the first physics-based, calculus-based physics. Not because they don't know the material, but because they can learn more. They can get an even deeper understanding. They can adjust to college, and then they can go from there. But it typically is considered prestige when you start with more advanced courses. Use the analytics and see how many kids end up getting C's in those courses. This is what we had to say to a lot of kids. How's that working for you when you went on that way? So it's not to put down AP courses. It is to say, as I can say from having written questions in AP in math, that the questions in AP are formulaic. If you listen to your teacher and you don't learn how to plug in, you'll do pretty well on those tests. But you get to a regular calculus course, I'll give you 5 problems. 3 you've seen before, 2 you may never have seen before. And all of a sudden you freak out. You go, oh my God, I don't know this. And you get a D. And it happens all the time. Look at the data. We weed out so many students in their first year of science in America.
And Freeman, you're exactly right. You know, when I went to Knoxville, I had almost a photographic memory. I remembered all the formulae. I had an A going into the final in my math course, the first and second semester. I ended up making 88 and 90 on the finals, but that was out of a 200. Oh. It's because I studied so hard, I forgot I had brain lock.
Wow.
And I say, this is never, ever going to happen to me again. What I learned to do is to derive the formula so I would never forget it.
Sure.
So I didn't rely on the formula. And then it began to allow me to approach solving problems different. Don't just remember the formula and plug in the numbers. Like you said, read the word problems, understand what you're doing. I'm going to ask you a question, if Jim will allow me, that Isaiah Warner asked me to ask you, and I did. And it was that if you look at your Meyerhoff program, and we're taking in students with 4.0s, very high test scores and so forth. And right now, those kids are going to make it anyway. They're going to get free rides to the Ivy League schools. They're going to go to a good school, and they're going to have a chance for a good education.
Right.
If we are really going to make a difference, should we be focusing more attention on cultivating some of those diamonds in the rough? People who may have that potential, but haven't shown it in test results, grades, and so forth. And if you were going to go down that road, how would you do that?
Sure. So let me, first of all, congratulate Isaiah Warner, one of the largest producers of blacks who get PhDs in chemistry. He's amazing. Yes. He's absolutely amazing. Now, with that said, I want you to go back and look at our original articles in the first 15 years, because they still hold, and we've got some that have backed it up. We were able to look at the grades of students, not only who came to the Meyerhoff, but those who went to the Ivies and to, the most prestigious of places in our country, who had the same backgrounds as our students. And a student from our campus out of Meyerhoff was 5 times more likely to go on and complete a PhD in science than kids who went to those places. In other words, even though they had the 4.0s and they had solid test scores, black kids' solid test scores will not be perfect scores. The best kids on my campus will have easily perfect math scores. My black kid may have a high 600, early 700 sometimes, not the perfect score as a rule, all right? But the point is that, what we make one big mistake. We think that the high achieving kids, they will make it anyway. They are not making it at the Ivies. And one of the areas of proof, look at our articles, just the most recent ones in Issues in Science and Technology, and look at who are in the top 25 institutions in producing blacks who go on and complete PhDs. And you do not see the most prestigious institutions. Now, you will see some of them there for producing MDs. And the secret sauce there for people of means is often you don't major in science. This is what people don't, more than half the kids from the most prestigious place of all races. No, you don't major in natural and science and engineering. You major in a social science or humanities. You become broad. You take the science courses you need for the MCAT and get a good score there, and you can go to med school. But so we need to stop thinking, well, if they have A averages, they're going to make it. They do not make it. If they did, we'd be above 1% of the scientists at NIH who are Black right now. That's the first part. But with that said, what people don't know in my office, there's a wide range. We have some kids who have, above 700 math SAT, but we've got kids from inner city Baltimore to rural Maryland who may not have that kind of background. So there's a range in that program. They may be the best in their schools, but a 4.0 at an inner city school is not a 4.0 in Howard County, Maryland, or in Prince George's County if you go to a science and tech school. You get my point? So think that way first. The second point, though, is we did work with NIH on the BUILD program. The BUILD program, and that Isaiah may want to look at, is for students who are not the A students, but who are solid students, okay? And to get them to stay in science. So the BUILD program is, for our program, is modeled after Meyerhoff, but with the same thing with the Summer Bridge program and those kinds of things. And those students are doing well. Are they always doing as well as Meyerhoff? Not necessarily, but we're getting more and more through science and looking at opportunities. So there is the BUILD program we have. The best news that I can give you is that some of my best Black students are not Meyerhoffs anyway, though. They are doing really well and working with other programs. That's when you know you have success, when you got both. But let us not make the mistake of thinking the high achieving student, Black student, or even white student with high test scores and grades will succeed. If that were the case, more than 30% of whites who enter science would be remaining in science.
I want to bring this discussion about diversity into a slightly different axis. This comes from an excellent question from one of our people participating. It says, how do we best incorporate the LGBTQ community, especially those who are also Black and Latinx, when we develop and propose these kinds of amazing programs that seek to further diversity, equity, the diversity, equity, and inclusion environment?
Good. It's a very good question. The language we use is underrepresented groups. And so I'm very proud that we have strong participants in our program from that community, from transgender to gay. And we talk about those issues too. One of the things we need to do in the larger community and in minority communities is to talk about the challenges that people from LGBTQ groups have in our society. And we learn from each other. So we have been doing kind of training and support to give students support, but also to broaden the minds of all of our students. And so when we talk about underrepresentation, yes, race matters, no doubt about that. But there are other groups in that program, including low-income kids, LGBTQ. We've had kids with physical challenges, for example, first-generation college. I will say that in the Meyerhoff program, about 60% of the students are African-American. And then we have Latinx group, and then we have some whites and Asians, and we have students who are from LGBTQ, some who are first-generation college. So it's got that mixture. So we do talk about underrepresentation and the challenge of helping students to feel good about who they are, helping each student to have a sense of self and to be able to represent himself or herself or whatever pronouns that they use. We do talk about the pronouns a lot. We do. And that's been most recently over the last 7 or 8 years. We've gotten to that point of enlightenment.
Willie, could you respond to this question also? I think this is a very important issue, which is why I brought it to the table from the questions that are being sent in. Dr. May, what can you tell our?
Looking at it from a national competitiveness perspective, if we are going to win the race against other emerging powers, we're going to have to rely on the talents of our entire community to be successful. So that's going to be gender independent, race independent. We need the best and able minds to contribute to the technological competitiveness of this country, period.
And it helps when the Meyer program and our students can see great examples. So if you get a chance, look at the UMBC out list, large numbers of faculty who are from that population, bisexual, gay, transgender, queer, and with opportunities for students to get to know faculty, to hear their stories, and to give them support in that process. We honestly think for the campus that an enlightened person is one who understands the perspectives, the journeys of people from a variety of backgrounds.
I think that by and large, the science and technology community has always been more welcoming to people that are different, because by and large, most scientists have typically, you guys excluded certainly, been looked upon as being nerds, being different. So because of that, I think we have been more welcoming to people of all genders.
Willie, let me just go ahead.
Dr. Hrabowski, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, Willie, in some cases that may be the case, but I've had enough experience with people where it's not been the case, just being honest with you.
Okay.
We're very proud that our Dean of Engineering is gay and has been very helpful to us as we have gone through some of these issues in STEM. And people are the products of their childhood experiences.
We all are.
You know what I mean? And just as we have biases against Blacks and biases against women and different cultural experiences and religions, there are challenges that we face in our country and on our campuses involving LGBTQ also. I get what you're saying about differences some cases when people are enlightened, but we've got darkness, spots of darkness across disciplines. I wish I could say it was better than one. I'm just not sure. I've seen too many examples, and my students and colleagues have shown me how we have to be a moral force in talking about these issues. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you, Dr. Provowski. In fact, I was going to also push back against Dr. May. A computer scientist who is extraordinarily well known was Alan Turing. Maybe you've heard about the Turing test.
Yep.
Well, Alan Turing was, first of all, a gay man, and he committed suicide because of the psychological oppression that he suffered at the hands of the British government after the Second World War. So we certainly have examples of extraordinary people of the LGBTQ community who have been ostracized to the extent that it was just psychologically unbearable. But he's one of my heroes because he said something that I think a lot of us need to understand and contemplate. He said once that it is sometimes the people that no one can imagine anything of who do the things no one can imagine. And that is the secret of innovation. And that's the pithiest statement I know about that. So, when people talk about the Turing test, I have a new Turing test for them. Do you know this?
And that, you know what? And that's why I keep bringing up Dr. Kizmikia Corbett. When we think of vaccine, we don't think of a face of a young Black woman. We just do not, and growing up in a little rural town in North Carolina, people never told her that she could do something like this. So I want people to go and Google Dr. Kizmikia Corbett, because that says what can happen in any of these disciplines. Yvonne Edmonds is a brilliant Black woman, graduate of my campus. I just thought about it, PhD from Stanford in physics, who's a data scientist in one of the research places. Now, another example, we need these examples of people who we don't expect that from because we've not seen it. We've not seen it. We know Shirley Jackson, thank goodness,
yes.
That's Rensselaer. But just think about these young people coming up who are doing it. How do we get many more to do it?
And Jim and Freeman, I did not mean to imply that society did not look down upon gay, transgender people.
Yes.
What I meant to imply is within the science and engineering community, we were more welcoming than generally society because many of us were looked upon as being different also.
Well, again, Dr. May,
my view.
I tell people I always try to form opinions based on observation and fact. Mm-hmm. And my lived experience of life doesn't support the view that you're talking about.
Well, this is the great thing about being in America. We can agree to disagree with civility.
Yes. during this administration anyway.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
I do have to tell you that one of our participants has also chimed in on my side of the argument, Dr. May, by saying, I'm so sorry, but the worst misogynist and queerphobia has been from older scientists.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I am old.
Yeah.
But I sure hope you don't include yourself among those groups of scientists.
No, yeah, of course.
Okay, so let me, another question for you, Dr. Freeman. Well, actually, both of you, but I think, Freeman, you'll probably want to weigh in on this one generally. It's generally well acknowledged that physics departments at predominantly majority institutions in particular are sometimes not the most welcoming and supportive places for Black students. What are your thoughts on the tension between wanting to recruit more Black students while simultaneously not wanting to actively bring students into an environment that might be challenging at best? And Freeman, let's start with you.
Sure. I think, and we have a fine physics department. I mentioned, and we have increased the number of women. We do have 2 Black physicists on campus now, and there are particularly several faculty, white men faculty and women, who are supportive of our students. But in general, what I would say is you want to identify 1 or more people in the department who can be advocates for those students, number 1. In the earlier years with Meyerhoff, we were trying to figure out how to get more support in the departments, how to figure that part out. And so the program really was about academic support. This is where staff can be very important in having tutors and others to work with them. The critical piece will be, how do you make sure the students you bring in have enough of a background, again, I'm going to say it, that they have a reasonable chance of succeeding. It's not enough that it's a feel-good thing. You got to be able to analytically say, we looked at the whether it's the calculus background, reading background, physics background, and if they don't, how do we give them more support? This is one of the reasons we have a bridge program the summer before the freshman year. For those who are going, typically engineer, we have problems in physics and in chemistry, hard problems, just to get them accustomed to thinking that way of thinking, and to show them that high school work is nothing like what it's going to get to be in college. So those kinds of things can work. So it can work, it really can. But identifying 1 or more people who will be advocates, even if they've not had a lot of success with Blacks, and most institutions have not, people who say, but I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to learn and work with you. That's all you need. And in any department, you're going to have some good people who are willing to give support and to try.
So the next question, I'm going to come back mostly to you, Dr. Hrabowski, because most of the questions are rolling towards the Meyerhoff and your experience as leader.
Sure.
So one question that has come is, what are the norms and standards of conduct that you establish in the Meyerhoff program to maintain high expectations and provide mutual student support in the program?
It's a part of the definition of community. When you read those articles, you will see we have a theme of those to whom much is given, much is expected. That's not just academically, but that's in terms of their behavior. They are to be supportive of each other. These are students who are learning how to love the research itself. They are to be helpful to each other. We will not accept cutthroat behavior. Doesn't mean kids can't be competitive, but they work to help each other. Each group is responsible for the group right below it. So the first group of students, by the way, were all Black males. And I had wanted men and women. Mr. Meyerhoff, who is a philanthropist, had wanted to do something to help Black males because he said everything he saw positive on TV was about sports. And then everything else was about handcuffs. And he said, I've already given, my wife is a graduate of Goucher. We're doing a lot with women there. I wanted it to have men and women. He said, I want to see what you can do with Black males. Now, I will tell you, we had a lot of criticisms from people about starting a program for Black males, but they were from whites. The group that was most supportive of our starting a program for Black males were Black women. They said, we need this. We need this not just for our sons and our nephews and brothers, but because we see white women, Black women ascending and Black men are still down. So that first year was Black men. After that, we were able to bring in women and men, and it's always been about half and half. But here's the point. The first group decided to call themselves M1s, meaning first group of Meyerhoffs. I said no, because that's a gun. And they said, I said, well, you want to call yourselves MS ones? They said that's a disease. So they won out somehow. And we then got to M16s. We're now up to M34s, I think, but we're past the guns. But in every group, the M2s, M1s help M2s. Right now, I think the freshmen actually this year, M32s. M31s help the M32s. Every group helps the group below it. And that's not just academically. They are responsible for observing and making suggestions to students along the way and giving support when there are problems. So
another question that I wanted to ask you, but I didn't, is that knowing what you know now and with the experiences you've had, if you had to recreate the Meyerhoff program, would you do it any differently?
The one thing I will tell you, I told you that for many years the program was black, and then we had the Banneker case, as you know, at College Park, and you could no longer have only a race-based program. And I think what we're doing now is even better. It is with the criterion of an interest in excellence in academics, but an interest in underrepresented groups. So you've got these other groups involved, and it's teaching students in this community to have people from whites, blacks, few Native Americans, Latinx, but LGBTQ, some who have with physical challenges, and to talk about underrepresentation and the issues that women face. So it's richer that way, and that's what we've done. What I would tell you is that the one thing that we're doing now, because we've continued to tweak, is to make it clear that earning a PhD is barely the beginning. You see, for a long time, people thought once you get the PhD, you've arrived. And so what happened was all of a sudden, the big consulting firms, everybody came after our kids. They were buying them with big shrimp cocktails. They were just literally, I mean, from Harvard, PhD in biophysics. And before you know it, the woman is going to work at a prestigious consulting firm because she got great dinner. And she said, Doc, you should have seen those big shrimp. I mean, it's just because they just didn't know, because you didn't have universities saying to them necessarily, let's do a postdoc. And then it's not because of money. It's just they hadn't thought about this need for more researchers, bench science. And the real challenge, I'm going to be honest with you, is that when a young black PhD can speak well, people will want that person to move over to either policy or diversity very quickly. And it sounds good to be an assistant dean, not knowing it, there's nothing wrong. We need people to know this, but no, bench science. We talk much more about the beauty of the research, and that what they're doing will help people they may never see. We're doing much more. And to say, when you get that PhD, then you're ready to start the postdoc. We're ingraining them with that idea from the beginning. And that's not for everybody, because everybody is not going to be a professor. I get that. But we want many more thinking about the professoriate as others do other kinds of things. That's the big difference.
So thank you for the shout out, Freeman, to the professoriate. I am in my 50th consecutive year teaching either mathematics or physics to university students, and it has always been a great source of joy for me. And I hope that many of my colleagues feel the same.
Yes.
50 years of teaching is an incredibly long time. So, just
you both have aged very well.
I can tell you, Dr. May, that some of those students actually added to that aging process. The last question I'm sorry. Before I go to this last question, Dr. May, I want you to expound on this issue about ethics and standards and behavior there, because this in the technical disciplines is becoming a more sharp issue. We saw it, for example, around how the disparate treatment of women in technical fields. And so can you speak to us a little bit about what you've seen, for example, in your experience at NIST, about making sure that it was a hospitable environment for all sorts of people to contribute to the science, not just males and not just one specific race. Can you speak to that for a moment?
Well, NIST is just a microcosm, is and was a microcosm of the rest of the world. The majority of the staff were white males. Slowly, we began to bring in more females, and now we're bringing in more people of color. So it's no different than any place else. There had to be some incentives to do that. I actually show a picture often when I give talks. In fact, I'll show it tomorrow. I'm participating in the NIST Black History Month program, and I'll show a picture of the NIST staff at a seminar when I arrived in 1971. And they were all Black males with the same black rim glasses, looked all alike, not a Black to be seen, although I was in the auditorium, but I was back in the corner someplace and not in the picture.
So you mean all white males? All white males?
All white males. I'm sorry, all white males. And there were no females either. So we at NIST had to try to solve that problem like everyone else. And I think if you are about trying to be the best you can be to support U.S. competitiveness, you realize that you have to draw from the entire population, the best minds, the most able minds. And I hope that argument will win out. It's not about preconceived notions. It's about trying to get the best team. And we all know now that the best teams are diverse teams. And you don't get that just by looking at test scores, because if you're going to solve difficult problems, having people who have different points of view and who are innately just as intelligent as others, and you get them together working on those teams, you are able to solve very tough and transformative problems. I don't know whether I answered your question or not.
You did. And I'm looking over the questions that I've seen both in the chat as well as other questions that have been communicated to me. I think we covered broadly the domain of questions that our participants have been interested in getting responses to. It is now 4:22. We were scheduled to stop at 4:30. And so not seeing any very different questions, I think I'm going to declare victory. I think this has been a marvelous presentation for our community. And as you know, the whole goal of this webinar series is to get my community of physicists, to begin thinking about these sorts of questions at a level of intensity that rivals the intensity they apply to doing physics.
Yes.
So that, I think that the two of you have made an extraordinary contribution to this process. I thank you both for your time and generosity, and even in the run-up period of planning this event. The fact that only two of you were basically on the stage here is a tribute to your ability to enunciate these things. And I just want to say that to the people who are still with us, thank you. There will be a subsequent Delta Phi webinar, but we're looking to expand beyond the axis of diversity, equity, inclusion. There are lots
Professor Gates, let me ask you a question.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm going to permit that.
Okay.
Go right ahead, Doctor.
Okay. If you could relive your career, what would you do differently to add more diversity to your field of endeavor? What could you do differently, looking back now? And maybe the answer is nothing, but
that is the answer.
Okay.
I've been actively involved around issues of diversity for 25 years.
I know you have. That's why I asked you the question, man.
I know. I kind of got your point. You want the audience to know something about my background.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who have jumped into this discussion in the last recent times, but I'm someone who's been doing this in my entire career. If people who are not familiar with this will go to the Delta Phi web pages at the American Physical Society, there are documents that I've written. I know you know, Dr. May, that one of my essays was cited by the Supreme Court. So I'm not a Johnny-come-lately to this battle, and I recognize a couple of things. One is that if we're all going to change, then we can't leave parts of ourselves behind. Mm-hmm. And that means it's the difficult work of talking over and over, appealing to people's logic and morality, because I think physicists by and large are extraordinarily logical and by and large pretty moral. We're not perfect in my experience, but I think we're better than a lot of people give us credit for. And so I'm just gratified that, I've come to this time where we're seeing new possibilities in making progress. And I am more confident than ever that if the physics community is left to solving this problem in our own midst, that we're going to find ways to do this. And so, although I felt a little bit uncomfortable with you drawing me out like that, that's who I am, as you well know. And Dr.
And Jim, I wanted to add that, again, we as a society need to have our best minds to address some of our most intractable socioeconomic problems. Can you say a few words about me drafting you for an assignment about 7 or 8 years ago that you cursed me out about initially and probably still do? But can you say a few words about that? Because with the new administration, maybe that idea might be revived.
Well, Willie knows I didn't. I don't use profanity unless it's ordinarily provoked. And so Willie was speaking figuratively.
Yes.
But what he's talking about is the fact that as a scientist, I recognize, and as a physicist, I recognize the value of physics is not necessarily that we do physics, it's how we do physics that's the most remarkable thing.
And how you approach problems.
And how we approach problems. And so Dr. May asked me to join the National Commission on Forensic Science, which I did for 4 years. And the issue was all about let me say it this way. Many people have seen the television and video programs called CSI, and they think that forensic science is actually scientific, based on science. But in the real world, to some degree, that's just not true. And so the Obama administration, acting on the basis of a report that was written by the National Academy that looked at the quality of science and forensic science, established this National Commission on Forensic Science. And that's really where Dr. May and I worked most closely together in my career, was on the work of trying to get forensic science in our country to actually rely on science, real science, demonstrable science, evidence-based science. And you might think this sounds very odd, but if that is one area of our justice system where physicists can make outsized contributions if they will only get involved. And Dr. May, along with some other people in the Obama administration, figured that I was their victim. I was not bright enough to be able to say no. And so I wound up doing things in forensic science, and I still have, I've had some relationships with.
And you actually enjoyed it.
You all could be a reality TV show. The two of you, I mean, you both, it's very impromptu. It is not exactly what Jim was expecting.
Yeah, I know.
Can't let him off the hook. I do want to say this. Jim and I have worked together in educating students for years and years. When he was in Maryland, he took one of my very best and challenged him to be better. And he is a physicist now at NSA. And the one thing I would hope, and to say this to both of you, is that we will use the expertise and the experiences of those Black physicists who do exist. I mentioned Bilal Demos and Anthony Johnson and others to help us in crafting these programs, and that you in your new position, Jim, with the American Physics Society can help us in developing something that has some teeth in it, meaning some money, to look at what really can work with a focus on physics and what we might do. I would challenge the American Physics Society to think about that, bringing together some of the experts from different campuses. I've got two of mine, obviously, Jim, you know everybody, and Willie, but that's where we need to be now. We need to be talking in concrete terms about what we can do.
And Jim, I was only trying to bring out that we need our best and most able minds to address some of our more intractable problems, and they're not always in the laboratory.
Well, sometimes they let us, we escape the laboratory. And on those occasions, we try to do something good in the world before scurrying back into the laboratory. Okay, we are now, folks, at 4:30, which was our appointed time to end. And I still see that we have at least 130 participants. I want to thank all of you who have persevered through this presentation. I hope it has been informative. I hope you got some hints about things that you can do, some information about where you might find literature and resources. And let me remind you that these Delta Phi webinars are recorded and can be found on the web page of the American Physical Society. If you'll just put in Delta Phi and American Physical Society in a Google search, you will find them. Each of these web pages not only memorializes the presentations, but have added links to materials, content, literature that you can use if you are so inspired to make this change. And in fact, that's what the whole dream about what this webinar series would do, would to activate physicists to become active in this domain and fix this problem. Because after all, what do we physicists actually do? We study problems and we fix them. We learn how to fix them. And so that's the challenge that we're presenting here. Thank you very much. And I think we're done.